Rent is outrageous.
Hopefully it doesn't keep rising.
The property tax is very high.
How do we feel about where we live?
I think it's a nice melting pot.
The Lehigh Valley is very affordable.
Right now, it's very hard to get a nice house for under $250,000.
What do we say about the Lehigh Valley's quality of life?
Beautiful place to live with kids.
There's all kinds of people. Traffic's a lot worse.
Tonight, LehighValleyNews.com and PBS 39 present a special community conversation, Life in the Lehigh Valley. We'll examine how far the valley has come and how it's changing, for better
I'm optimistic.
or for worse.
Things aren't the way they were 6 or 7 years ago.
Join us for the next hour as we touch on who we are, the local economy, affordability, and how we're all getting along. Now, here's your host, Brittany Sweeney.
Hello and welcome. We in the Lehigh Valley have it better than most. A growing area, a diverse local economy, a place attracting new business and people. But for many, progress here is putting pressure on our traditional way of life. Tonight, we'll explore that. I'm Brittany Sweeney. PBS 39 and LehighValleyNews.com are proud to bring you this community conversation, Life in the Lehigh Valley, live from the Univest Public Media Center in Bethlehem. We have a lot to talk about, and we've talked to many of you already about who we are as a region and where we're headed. Spend just a little time out and about. It's easy to find folks who appreciate life in the valley.
Definitely is getting a lot busier. As time goes on, traffic's a lot worse from even 5 years ago.
I was live here like 8 years ago. I before lived in New York, but we had to move here. But my experience to here, it's very, very good. It's the beautiful place to live with kids because they have freedom. They can go to play outside, don't have worries.
I love living in the Lehigh Valley. You know, I've been here. I went to school here, Muhlenberg College, DeSales University. I work here. My businesses are in the Lehigh Valley, and I live in the Lehigh Valley. It's close to everything. If I want to go to the city, New York, only an hour away. Major airports, and just everything about the valley is great.
Hour and a half away from New York City, an hour and a half away from Philly and the beach. So it's like an ideal situation in that, you know. It's close enough, but still, you know, far enough away from everything.
I'm not kind of like an international student. I'm coming from China. So it's really peaceful to staying here.
Things aren't the way they were 6 or 7 years ago, and especially with renting, that's definitely not the case. I think it's pretty expensive living around here nowadays, so.
Last fall, we at Lehigh Valley Public Media commissioned a study through the Institute of Public Opinion at Muhlenberg College. We wanted to take the pulse of the valley to mark the launch of our nonprofit local news website, LehighValleyNews.com. To fund it, we partnered with the Lehigh Valley Economic Development Corporation and Lehigh Valley Partnership. The findings revealed much about us, our opinions and outlook, our concerns and fears, our takes on the rising cost of living and race relations, all of which we'll dive into tonight. Overall, the survey found 86% of Lehigh Valley residents rate our quality of life as excellent or good. High marks for sure. Those ratings were consistent with those over the past decade, going back to 2011. But while the large majority of us maintain positive views about life in the Lehigh Valley, we're divided on something else: the future. 40% of those surveyed, 4 in 10 people, said they believe our region is headed in the wrong direction. More people said that it's getting worse than getting better. Many varying opinions. Here to help break it all down is the author of that study, Christopher Borick. He's a professor of political science at Muhlenberg College and director of the Institutes of Public Opinion. Professor Borick, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
You've done studies like this in the past, these surveys. The ratings are always pretty strong. Is that the same for this particular survey?
Yeah, generally we see those overall appraisals of quality of life in the Lehigh Valley as positive. As those numbers were shown earlier, Brittany, give us a sense that overall people that live in the valley see this as a good place to live. Some of those comments that were just shared. I think are reflective of the general sense that the Lehigh Valley, Northampton, and Lehigh counties are positive environments to live. They're not perfect. There's challenges, but on the whole, people are pretty satisfied with life here, and that's been consistent for a while.
Sure, but then those numbers are good, but then there's public outlook, which is a little bit different. What was different this time around when it comes to the outlook?
Compared to the last time we did a quality of life survey in the area 5 years ago, there was a little bit more negative views about the direction of life in the valley. A pretty divided group. About 40% of Lehigh Valley residents said they think we're headed in the wrong direction, about 30 in the right, and the remaining 30 about the same. So for a plurality of individuals, there was more pessimism about the way we're headed. And that's a little different. There's been times 10 years ago when we did the survey, we had similar numbers. So there's periods of time when you see that more negative outlook. But in this particular one, it caught a lot of attention.
Does that kind of show what's happening across the country as well as here in the Lehigh Valley?
It's a wonderful point. It's a snapshot in time. We're doing this poll as the country and the valley comes out of a pandemic. A lot of stress across the country. Polls nationally show a very negative outlook about the direction of the country, about the state. You see those. So we're not an outlier in that. We're a little bit different than we were 5 years ago, but the country is in a different place. So I think conditionally we have to consider what and when we were doing this, which was last year.
Let's talk about the survey as a whole, the methodology. How was this information collected?
Yeah, so this is a survey of Lehigh Valley adults. It's a telephone survey, primarily through cell phones. As you can guess right now, if you're talking to people, it's going to be through cells. We still do reach out to some landlines for households that rely on landlines to do that. It was put in the field last fall, so we're in the field in the fall of 2022. That gave us a pretty long period to be out there trying to reach people and follow up and make those conversations. And so it was conducted in that method.
And how people rated quality of life, you broke that down, right? Different demographics when it came to age, race, income. How did you break that down?
Yeah, we do it by a variety of demographic factors. So we ask people at the end of the survey to identify themselves in a variety of ways, how they identify their gender, how they identify racially, ethnically, their educational attainment, their income level. So those are self-reported. And then we break out the findings on questions like overall quality of life by those demographic areas. And you could tell there are major divides, as you might expect, across different communities, different cohorts of Valley residents, and how they both appraise the overall quality of life here and the direction of quality of life.
Sure, and we're going to talk more about that as this program goes on. And let's talk about why people said life was getting better or worse, those reasons. Take a look at this. First, the main reasons people say life is getting better. There are some responses here that paint a very strong picture. The main reason people say life is getting better, more businesses are here. 23% of people who said life is getting better cited that. Also, attractions and things to do cited 22% of the time. Job opportunities also with a strong showing. Improved downtowns as well. Have we seen this before in your experience, Chris? Have you seen these same motivators for people to come here and stay here?
Yeah, to a degree, but these things pop, right? Oh, well, interestingly enough, we asked people in their own words to report these, and we broke them into categories, the staff at the Institute of Public Opinion. And what is found is you hear things repeated, like there are more businesses, or the downtowns are much better, or I could find a job much easier than I used to. So you see these things. And over time, we've seen periods, about a decade ago when the downtowns really started to take off, and particularly Allentown, we saw people pointing to that in surveys as a change in positive life. We've seen over time when we've asked Lehigh Valley residents to report on the things to do in the valley, that's continuously increased. We've been polling those things back almost 20 years in the Lehigh Valley. So there's a sense that there's lots of new engaging and forward-moving opportunities for people that live in the valley.
Absolutely. Now let's take a look and see the main reasons people cited for life getting worse. Here's what they had to say. Crime and violence, the #1 answer, cited 34% of the time. The cost of living coming in at #2. Then we get into growth issues, the number of people moving here, overdevelopment, and traffic congestion. Do you find any of this surprising? Any of this stick out as well?
Yeah, I think you anecdotally hear a lot when people talk about what the challenges are in the Lehigh Valley. things like traffic and overdevelopment of the region, loss of some open spaces. The issue of crime being most prominently listed. It's an issue that permeates lots of the national discussion right now. A little important point, we were doing this survey in the middle of the fall election season. A lot of ads were running about that issue, really bringing up the salience, I think, to it. But we see this in a lot of areas of the country, so I wasn't necessarily surprised that that would stand out. The other issue that didn't surprise me at all, and you've had it in your earlier discussions, is housing and the affordability issues. There's both national inflation, but in the region, the challenges of affordable housing, I know we'll talk about it a little bit later, are significant. And a lot of people, when they said in their own words, it was those housing stressors that were on their minds.
Sure, we talked about some of the different factors, the different age groups, the different races, the different income levels. So when it came to younger people, they seem to be more optimistic about the Lehigh Valley than some of the older folks. And so is that expected here in the Lehigh Valley at this point in time?
It's a fascinating divide, Brittany. I think one of the things that I was most interested in testing in the survey, and we asked a number of questions, not only about age, but about how long you've lived in the Valley. And we see this divide where older, longer-term residents of the Lehigh Valley are a little bit more pessimistic about where we're headed now. And I think some of that could be nostalgia for the past, remembering some of the good things, maybe not as much some of the bad things, but being a little bit concerned about that. Well, a lot of younger residents that either moved to the Valley or younger generations that are here are pretty positive about the Valley. They like a lot of the things and pointed out some of the things we talked about before and opportunities economically, recreationally, entertainment-wise. And so that was pretty stark. And you could see it almost in every age group as we went up and looked at this, that you saw a little more pessimism as you got older.
Sure, we talked about what people think has gotten worse, what people think has gotten better. Let's talk about the timing and the factors, that type of thing. When you conducted this survey, the time of year it was conducted, could that have an impact on people answering?
Sure.
And what they answered and how they answered?
It's a great point, and it really does. It's the old adage, probably overused cliche, is surveys are a snapshot in time. They represent when we're talking to people, when we're trying to do the interviews. And we were doing this in the fall, right? Inflation, of course, was still very, very high. It still is. Will come down a little bit, but that's part of the picture. The election season, as I mentioned before. Anybody that lives in Pennsylvania during election time knows that we're inundated with ads, and those ads are often negative. They're negative ads. They're focusing on issues. They're trying to bring attention for partisan reasons and electoral reasons to issues. So you might see an issue like crime that was really highly covered in that be elevated in concerns. That doesn't mean that that's the only thing driving people's concerns, but those are the factors that could shape. Every survey, we could talk about this at different points, has limitations, right? And the first thing we have to do is recognize those limitations.
Sure, so it kind of depends on the time of year that you're conducting these surveys.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we're going to be talking about housing affordability and race relations throughout this program, but what were some of your big takeaways about housing and how affordable it is here in the Lehigh Valley?
Yeah, I mean, so like in so many things, we're measuring perceptions. There are a lot of people that can measure other indicators, measures of things like affordability, and they could talk much better than I can to this issue. But of course, housing affordability is a challenge in many parts of the country. You know, I've done a bunch of focus groups and studies over the last few years. Before the pandemic, that issue of affordable housing comes up over and over again. People are challenged by it. And the reality is that a lot of people that may have come to the Valley see it still as relatively affordable. Others that might live here that want to move from one housing situation to another might find it more difficult than they did at one time, and that's a stress. So housing is an enormous stress on life. I know we'll talk with some folks later on that have studied this for years, but it certainly is a topic that was on people's mind.
Absolutely. What stuck out to you about race relations in this survey? You
know, overall, and we're going to talk about this later, the positive, generally positive views about race relations in the Valley. We only weren't able to go very deep on the topic. Love to be able to do that more down the road, but from the questions that we asked, a generally positive view. And what's fascinating again is the divide. Younger residents of the Valley, more optimistic about race relations than older residents. And that brings up some interesting questions for people. The Valley's become more diverse in a lot of ways. For individuals that once lived in a place that was less diverse, how do they acknowledge that? How do they bring that into their conclusions about race relations? It's a very complicated area to talk about, but important to look at.
Sure, Professor Bork, we're going to have you stay right where you are because we're going to bring you into this conversation as we invite some more guests on this evening. So we want you to stick around. We have a lot more to cover. And one of the Lehigh Valley's success stories in recent years is the revival of the cities. I spent some time in Easton and Bethlehem talking with people about the economy, the cost of living, and affordability.
It depends on what area you go to, because nowadays rent is outrageous.
I'm trying to move, I'm trying to buy and or rent, and it's like I could either purchase a house and pay $2,000 mortgage, which is not in my realm at the moment, or $1,900 for renting, which I also can't do. So right now it's a little bit tough with renting and buying because the market has gone up since the pandemic.
More jobs. It's always better. More jobs, better pay, more options.
Having lived in Chicago and New York City, the Lehigh Valley is very affordable. One of the reasons I decided to come back and I start my business and my family here in the Valley, because it's very affordable.
I think the difficulty is the demand is high because it's a nice place to live, and that's why there's not enough housing and there's not enough especially enough affordable housing.
And we're going to talk more about that. Joining us now is our next guest, Don Cunningham. He's a former Bethlehem mayor, county executive, and for the past 12 years has headed the Lehigh Valley Economic Development Corporation, marketing the Lehigh Valley and recruiting businesses to come to this area. Don, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you. Lehigh Valley 20 years ago versus now, which one are you picking?
Today. I've lived here my entire life. And for those of us who did grow up here, if you kind of set aside the nostalgia and think of the reality, for those of us who grew up particularly in Bethlehem, the air was dirty, the river was dirty. If you woke up in Bethlehem, you smelled the rotten sulfur of the coke plant, and if you didn't want to swim in the river. When I graduated high school in the early 1980s, most of my class had to leave. And what we were focused on as a community throughout the 80s and 90s was what was called brain drain. It was young people leaving here for lack of opportunity. Today, it's the exact opposite. We have a tremendous inflow of young people. We're the fastest growing market in Pennsylvania for young folks, and they now make up more than 50% of our workforce. And you build an economy for young people and for tomorrow. You don't build it around yesterday.
And we're absolutely going to talk a little bit more about that. But first, I want to ask you, what are your takeaways? As someone who your job is to promote and bring people here to the Lehigh Valley, what are your takeaways from this survey?
Well, we don't only promote. We're a coalition that works on economic strategy. So we work on factors and targets, and we're not just a promotional organization. It is true that in select areas that we do recruit companies. My takeaway from the survey is, much like Professor Bork said, really no surprises there. I mean, if you've lived in the Valley and if you've been paying attention to things, you know where there are some pressure points. I would say just in general, whenever you have change, whenever you have growth, you have pain. When you're a kid and your legs are growing, have growing pains, and your mom or your grandma tell you to rub out those muscles because your bones are growing. Pain comes with change and growth, and that's what we're in the midst of right now. You're seeing some of those pain points. We're also caught up in some very significant national and international cycles. This issue of housing affordability, which is very real in the Valley, is a national issue. It came out of 08 and 09 and what happened with the recession in the housing market. And every growing metropolitan market across this country is experiencing the exact same pain points. It doesn't make it any easier here, but it's really not a Lehigh Valley created condition, although we have to work on solutions.
Sure. As someone who's led a city, led a county, what's the upside and the downside to that rapidly growing housing market, whether it comes to buying a house or renting a place?
Well, I think one of the folks you interviewed said it really well. When you have a nice area, people want to go there, right? It's the old Yogi Berra comment about this place is so crowded, it's got so crowded nobody goes there anymore. It's a head scratcher, right? So when Realtor.com has the 18017 and 18018 zip codes in their top 10 desirable zip codes in the country, you know, that happens because people want to be there, right? So the housing situation, the biggest way to solve it, quite frankly, becomes supply. You know, if you, without getting into the weeds too much, not enough single-family housing has been built at the affordable level since 08 and 09. People have hung on to their houses. You haven't had that normal cycle of people leaving them because they've clung to them, so the younger folks don't have them, and we need more supply.
Sure. When it comes to, you mentioned you grew up in the Lehigh Valley. When it comes to change, as you mentioned, where are you seeing that change?
Well, the biggest change, I think, has been economic, population growth and economic growth. You know, the one thing we have today that we didn't have when I was growing up here in the 80s or when my dad was a steel worker in the 60s is any real balance to the economy. Today, we have life sciences, we have med tech, we have healthcare that's abundant, and we also have a manufacturing economy that is the largest part of our economy in the Lehigh Valley, again today. We have 750 manufacturers making every product under the sun, and our largest employment sector is in the industrial sector again. And people have opportunity. They don't have to just be stuck with an employer. They can move elsewhere. They're making more than $20 an hour for non-skilled. While that doesn't get you a fortune, if you have a high school diploma or less than a high school diploma and you can make $22 an hour to start with benefits, you're at least have a fighting chance. I'm not saying that inflation still doesn't hurt and housing costs don't hurt, but look at a lot of other markets, particularly in Pennsylvania, you can't go get that.
Sure. A highlight earlier this week, Don, the governor was in town. He was addressing the LVEDC annual meeting. He was praising the Lehigh Valley for things like the local economy, the diversity. And so he really sang the praises and said that Lehigh Valley was the model for the rest of the state. So how has that happened? Did that ring true 10, 20 years ago?
That's overnight success that happened in 20 years, right? So Governor Shapiro, we have the benefit, I've known him a long time, others have known him. He comes from Montgomery County. He's very familiar with the Lehigh Valley. What's unusual is somebody actually holding us up as a model. We've quietly been doing what we've been doing in the Lehigh Valley. And I always say to folks, we're a suburb of nowhere. We're not a satellite. We're not dependent on New York or New Jersey. It's nice that we have that proximity, but we've built a community that's authentic, a culture that's our own, an economy that's balanced and real for our own folks right here. And the key now, and the survey reflects that, is to maintain what's made this place so great. Its quality of life, its community aspect, its charm, while still having us be discovered. You know, you look at the markets that have been discovered over the last decade. You look at Austin and Boston and San Francisco and the tech centers, and you don't want your success to blow you up, right? So, and that's really the balance. It's nice for Governor Shapiro to hold us up as a model. We are a model. We make things. You know, we have low unemployment. Our median family income has gone up $10,000 in 5 years. And that's significant. Our poverty rate from the last census to this census did not go up. It's 10%. It's below the national average. It's below the state average. We'd love to see it be zero. But it not going up is a sign. When poverty is not increasing and median family income is, that's creating opportunity for regular folks. And that's really what economic development's about. We can't do a lot about the inflationary pressures. They're national, they're international. They'll cycle back down. All we can do is keep letting our folks have opportunity to carve out their piece of the American dream in a special place, which is the Lehigh Valley.
Sure, and that Life in the Lehigh Valley survey had cited busy downtowns, and they said that young people are optimistic about living here. You mentioned brain drain from years ago. Now people, you know, this was the area people graduated and they left. That's not the case anymore. So what do you think changed?
Well, I mean, it's tough in a 30-second answer to tell you what's changed. I think a lot of good people doing a lot of smart things for a long time. And then we're fortunate, right? I mean, you take advantage of your fortune. Our location is great. We can reach 1/3 of the consumers in the United States on the East Coast in a one-day drive. And there are factors that we've capitalized on. We have great education, healthcare, and those things we've capitalized. That's not to say everything is perfect, but we've done a pretty darn good job of an area that was decimated by the loss of steel, the loss of textiles, the loss of heavy industries just back in the 1990s. Fast forward 20, 25 years to have built up a new economy that's growing in population, growing in job opportunities, and growing in income levels in 20 years is pretty good. The growing pains that come with that, though, are change. And particularly, look, I'm 57, right? I'm not quite in the retirement age yet, but as you get older, things changing and not being the way they once were, the shows on TV, the drive to the supermarket, baseball's different, it takes 3.5 hours. It just, people don't like it. You know,
Sure.
It doesn't surprise me that Chris's survey says older folks are, I talk to my dad in Florida almost every day. He's 77, he's cranky. You know, you get older, you just get a little bit like things bother you more.
Sure.
And it's completely legitimate. But you have to, a community has to evolve for the next generation, for our
Sure.
children and our grandchildren.
And I want to bring in Professor Borick here. This optimistic view from young people is not what you've seen in surveys past, correct?
Now, Don brings up some great points about that. I mean, that's one of the evolutions. As someone that studied over 2 decades public opinion in the Lehigh Valley, 20 years ago, we were looking at that. You didn't see that, right? You saw the pressures for brain drain that were still very much part of the Valley experience, people looking elsewhere. That optimism is an artifact, I think, of this particular poll that's really notable.
You know, I graduated Freedom High School in Bethlehem in 1983, and for the next 10, 15 years of my life, I hardly ever saw any of my classmates. They've slowly come back. They've returned, and when they come back and they realize, they say, wow, this place is different, and we want to move back. That's, to me, the greatest measure of success.
Let's move on to distribution centers, warehouses. They are popping up all over the Valley, or they're on the drawing boards to pop up in the Valley. Is that helping or hurting the quality of life here?
Well, manufacturing is, we are top 50 manufacturing market in the country. We put out $8.4 billion in GDP. People want things to be made in America again. We are an outlier. 18% of our economy is manufacturing. It's only 12% across the country. All those buildings that people generically call warehouses, a lot of them house manufacturers. A lot of them house the distribution of those manufacturers. We love Crayola crayons, we love Martin Guitar, we love Just Born candies. They have buildings that they make things in, they have buildings that they move things from. We throw that in with this pejorative term warehouse and kind of cast it all in some negative aspersion. The reality is that is the manufacturing economy of the Lehigh Valley. Now that said, there are places that are too far off the beaten path, that are too big and are driving trucks into rural roads that can't handle it. So you need smart planning, but you can't have an economy where you want to make things where skilled manufacturers can make $30, $40, $50 an hour, and at the same time say we don't want to, the proper term is industrial buildings. There's actually very little traditional warehousing. When people use that term warehouse, they're really talking about industrial buildings, and they'd be surprised what goes on in those industrial buildings. A lot of products being made in those industrial buildings.
Don, finding solutions to that housing crisis, what role do developers and business leaders play, if any?
Well, I think first it starts with recognition. You know, your program talking about it, the polls, I think every public leader elected, I hear them talk about it. And the reason there's more talk than change is because it's very difficult for the public sector to drive a solution to it. The best solution becomes market-based, and market-based needs, if you need more supply. If there's more supply, it meets the demand, it should bring pricing down. We're not used to the price points we're at. We want to see them come down. But unless the federal government's going to put forward an infusion of billions of dollars into subsidizing, you're probably not going to get a government-driven solution to this. And every market in the country is dealing with the same situation. People are commuting a little farther out, they're living in the Slate Belt or Carbon County and driving in. We didn't have that happen before, but hopefully we can get to some market change that will drive those costs down.
Sure, some great points made tonight. Don Cunningham from LVEDC, thank you so much for your insight tonight.
You're welcome.
We
Thanks
really
for having me.
appreciate it. Absolutely. And we continue this community conversation, Life in the Lehigh Valley, on PBS 39 and streaming on the web at LehighValleyNews.com. I should mention, you can find the complete Lehigh Valley Quality of Life survey, along with interactive graphics and reporting from our team of local journalists at LehighValleyNews.com. Just search Life in the Lehigh Valley. Additional reporting is in the works on topics like crime, the environment, and so much more. And something that came up again and again in the survey, the lack and the need for affordable housing. The pandemic only magnified the extent of the crisis. Community Action Lehigh Valley has helped hundreds of individuals and families stay in their homes. Now programs like the one it administered through the American Rescue Plan are ending or running out of money. I paid a visit to see what happens next.
Good morning, this is Suanne. How can I help you? I would say daily I get like 10 to 15 calls inquiring about rental assistance.
Suanne Carrero is the administrator for the Lehigh County Emergency Rental Assistance Program.
The first thing I ask them is, do you have an application with us? And if they don't, then I have to let them know, we're not able to assist you with rental, but we can provide you with a resource list. So we kind of try to help them with that. I just need you to provide me with your email.
The program, run by Lehigh County and Community Action Lehigh Valley, covers past due rent to those who make under a certain amount and suffered a hardship during the pandemic.
People lost their jobs due to COVID. They were let go. A lot of them had health concerns, and so they weren't able to work because of it. And so they fell behind on rent on that. And rent has gone up.
But money for the statewide program is running out.
Our program is currently closed. We're not accepting any new applications because of lack of funding. Is this one of the new ones that you just got?
Amor Inman oversees the Bethlehem-based operation.
The pandemic definitely didn't make things better. People weren't able to pay their rent because they weren't working. Some of people weren't able to work. And some people, since they weren't able to pay rent, some landlords depended on that rent. And if they didn't get it, sometimes they ended up going into foreclosure. So people were out of their homes as well.
Inman says her office receives about 50 calls per week from people needing help paying their rent or utilities. She says the people calling are not just those classified in the low-income group, but from all backgrounds.
The people who are contacting us are people who lived here, and they've lived here for quite some time. They're starting to feel like they can't stay here. I would say the demographic it's wide, it's diverse. I'm getting calls from, younger people, older people, anyone.
The program coordinator says of the $16 million allocated last year, about $2 million is left to aid people who applied through August, just before they stopped taking applications September 1st. Those who called after that date are referred to a list of other resources.
They could also try to make a payment plan with their landlord, and they can try to supplement their food and their hygiene products using other nonprofits that provide those things. We have the Second Harvest Food Bank. Those are some of the options that we try to provide.
She says the hope is that more funding will come through, but there's no guarantee. If more money isn't allocated, the office shuts down, Inman and her coworkers are out of jobs, and renters will have to find some other way to pay rent or face homelessness.
I think there is a lack of affordable housing absolutely everywhere.
Everywhere indeed, or so it seems. In fact, a majority of Valley residents rate housing negatively. 53% describe housing as not so good or poor. That's larger than any previous survey and significantly higher than the last time the question was asked in 2018, when only 19% described it that way. Our next guest spent a career advocating for access to affordable housing and economic opportunity. Alan Jennings retired 2 years ago after 40 years leading the Community Action Committee of the Lehigh Valley. The battle for affordable housing is not new, but it seems to be different now. So we welcome Alan here. And Alan, I ask you, what's changed?
Well, I think what's happening is that the problem is getting into higher income groups. As Don said, this is a supply and demand issue. And the supply, especially in housing, is always very slow to respond to demand. They have permitting processes, and you've got to wait for loans, and it's very difficult to make money as a landlord in a market, at least as a fair and honest landlord. And in the absence of public subsidies, there are deep troubles out there. And so if you've got middle-class people that are experiencing problems, you can only imagine how bad it is for people down the line.
Sure, Alan, we've heard tributes to the Lehigh Valley economy, how we've rebounded from their industrial roots. Now, is this just the price we pay for that success story?
Well, it is the price we pay, but it's not an acceptable price anyway, The reality is that builders can't build housing that's affordable to people with incomes below about 80% of the median, or say $60,000 household income. So if they can't build it, how do we make it happen? Well, you can let housing quality decline, have substandard housing that, in the more dense urban neighborhoods where the housing is older and they can't do as much aggressive code enforcement and so on. So there's a substandard element to the housing stock that's also challenging. So, this is a disaster. I mean, I used to call it a crisis. I think disaster is a better word now. The only way to deal with it is with government intervention. That's just a fact.
Sure, we're going to talk more about that, but let's take a look at some of the housing numbers right now. First up is the median home prices in the Lehigh Valley. Look at those numbers. Last year, the median sale price was just under $275,000. Now go back to 2009, and the median price in the Lehigh Valley was just under $180,000. That's a 51% increase in 13 years. Now, here's the rent situation. These are numbers from the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission. The median monthly rent in the Lehigh Valley in 2021 was $1,200. That was up 40% from the $850 it cost in rent in 2010. So Alan, are these increases on par with what you've seen over the years?
Well, there are housing costs, the housing market is very local. You could say that Allentown's housing market is very different from Bethlehem's, and even within Bethlehem, the north side is very different from the south side. And even within the south side, the housing that's closer to the university is very different from the housing that's a few blocks away. So it's hard to make some kind of a sweeping comment on why that's going on. But the reality is, we spend as a country about $108 billion a year subsidizing people's mortgages. And yet, if you're poor and you have the least ability to afford anything, people wait in line, and there's no entitlement to the subsidy like there is in the mortgage interest deduction. So, if you can't build housing because it doesn't work financially, we can either let people go out, live on a street, which is what's happening far too much, or you can fix it. And you want to fix it, it requires the will of the people to spend some government funding to do it. That's a simple fact. There's no other option.
Sure, you're talking about solutions here. When it comes to affordable housing, it's not easy. So where do you even start for that?
Well, you start by moving in with your friends. There's a lot of what we call couch surfing. That's not a tenable situation. You're violating the lease. It puts the host family at risk. The family doesn't have the stability that a family should have, and that affects health, that affects school performance. This is a problem that we all have, and we need to understand that this is everybody's problem.
Alan, the survey, it showed a significant drop in the decline, the public's rating of housing, even in the past 5 years. Is this because of the pandemic, or is there more to it than that?
Well, it's a multiplicity of issues. The pandemic certainly, complicated things. I felt terrible for the landlords that weren't getting paid, and I don't know how they survived the way they did. But there are all kinds of issues here. There's single-parent households continues to be a major issue. As I said, the quality of the housing stock, and it goes on and on and on. The inability of a builder to build housing that's affordable. It's very, and we can't nibble at the edges. We tried to do that. We had a design competition among architects. We have nonprofits trying to build housing. We've got all kinds of things that we've tried to nibble at the edges. But the reality is, this is a very expensive problem to solve. We know how to do it if we just lack the will, and that's just a fact.
Sure, you mentioned landlords. There's a lot of out-of-state landlords who don't maintain their properties. Then these properties the rent is just going up. Aren't they beneficiaries in this?
Well, the big thing is that New York and New Jersey's affordable housing program is called Pennsylvania. There's a large number of people moving in here. I was very frustrated in my 42 years that I wasn't able to do more for the low-income population, but we couldn't build a wall, And that's a major part of the problem, is that there's an ongoing flow of people into Lehigh Valley because Don's doing too good a job making Lehigh Valley a better place to live, and that makes the cost of housing go up. Yeah, you can say it's a great place to live, if you've got a home. If you don't, you're in deep trouble.
Sure, it seems inventory is an issue here too, affordable housing and the number of places that are affordable. So who's responsible to fix that problem?
Well, we all are. Again, this requires subsidies, but it also requires some loosening up of the restrictions. I mean, Don likes to defend the warehouses, but the reality is we have warehouses now that are big enough to be whole subdivisions. And instead of being housing subdivisions that would add to the housing stock, they're warehouses, So, I mean, you could put neighborhoods in those warehouses so, I mean, there's another side to that equation.
Sure. So you mentioned both of these, but is it an issue of land availability or is it an issue of public will to do this? All of the above. All of the above, right?
We just don't have enough. And the good thing is that this is affecting a higher income population. That's the good news, because those people are more likely to vote. Those people are more likely to contribute to people running for office. And those people are more likely to be paying attention to what it takes to solve the problem. So, I'll welcome them into the ranks, but that just, creates all the more trouble to try to solve.
Professor Bork, I want to bring you into this. Is this something you've seen throughout the years? Has this been a growing problem, or is it all of a sudden pandemic hits, this is a big issue?
Yeah, it's a growing problem. I met Alan almost a quarter of a century ago, and he was talking about these issues, my friend. They've been present, right? And over time, we see them come to kind of inflection points, right? And I think in the current moment, you just look, 5 years ago, a majority of people said it was, at least when they rated housing. I don't think the housing situation per se has changed all that dramatic, the stock and other things. It's their perception right now. And then we overlay that with our question about concern. That's where it really popped. We asked about a lot of concerns. This issue was off the charts. And that's not only among lower socioeconomic folks who are really pushed to the edge, but this is middle income individuals, other individuals that are trying to find. A lot of those times it's moving from rental to a first house, or moving from a first house to a second house. So it expands across the group, and it is a regional challenge.
One of the complications is that municipalities would rather not have a high-density, low-cost housing in their municipalities, because with that comes more police protection and more, snow clearing and all that kind of stuff. And so they restrict zoning to make it hard for, basically to be exclusionary. So if you can afford a half-acre lot, great, lucky you. If you can't, you're in trouble. And that's a local government thing that also can be addressed, but nobody is.
Yeah, I want to ask you more about local municipalities. Can't they require these developers to include affordable housing in their developments and their plans?
The Pennsylvania Municipalities Planning Code requires every municipality to provide land for the variety of uses, but they only say high density and low density housing. They don't say affordable. So if you're in Lower Macungie Township and you build, quote, high density housing, you're going to have $400,000 condominiums. That's not going to solve any of the problem. If we just changed a couple of words and put in there low income, we'd have a much different situation, I think.
Over the past week, the city of Philadelphia brought up possibly capping rent in certain neighborhoods. Do you see maybe that being a solution here in the Lehigh Valley? Do you see them even considering it? Yeah.
Oh, I'd be shot in the street before that'll ever happen. I think that there's got to be a way to do it that's fair. If you raise the rent by X amount, we're going to control it, your ability to raise it again, or something that allows some flexibility in the marketplace so landlords can make some money, but not enable them to gouge. The investors that are buying properties in the cities are driving up their rents, and they're doing it because they can. They're not doing it. They're not displacing anybody. It's not like people with money and different color skin are moving in. It's that they're just raising the rents and gouging people in the marketplace.
And it seems people are renting these places. They're paying it.
Right.
They're paying it. So is there any other solution? Is there any part of the state or the country that is doing it better, who has had a solution that is fixing this problem? What can we do here?
Don's right. The higher the quality of life, the more the housing prices are going to be. Housing affordability is a factor in the places that have the most robust economies. Denver, Portland, San Francisco, Washington, Boston. And the Lehigh Valley is showing that in little, small ways, but not. I mean, I agree, it is more affordable than those other communities. I used to kind of mock our economic development pitch that we said, we're near where you want to live. I mean, Don's doing a great job, but we've got a place now where people want to live in Lehigh Valley. That's great, but it stinks at the same time because of these issues, They contort the market in ways that require, contortion that's not easy to do.
Alan, after your decades of experience, what do you want people to know? What is their takeaway from this?
We're all in this together. If this is a community, that means we all commune, right? I mean, we're all in this together. You cannot, walk away. You can't turn a blind eye. These things catch up to people, and that's what I think Chris found is that you're getting higher and higher income people who are saying, yeah, this is a problem.
Absolutely, Alan Jennings. Thank you so much for your input tonight. We really value your opinion.
Happy to be here.
Thank you. And one of the biggest changes in the Lehigh Valley, it's the way we look. A key element of quality of life is strong relations across racial groups. I asked people what they made of race relations in the Valley. Here's what they said.
The Lehigh Valley people have been very welcoming to me. I'm from another country, originally Dominican Republic, and I feel very comfortable living here in the Valley. So
it's okay. Only way I say it's okay, because you could still get that vibe with somebody don't like you because your skin color. It could be better out.
I think they're good, but of course, I'm coming from a privileged place. So.
It's in a unique spot where there's a lot of diversity, especially like growing up, you always kind of knew somebody or of a different culture or race than you. So
I think it's a nice melting pot, really, here. I think there's a lot of all different types of races, and it's great. Like my daughters go to school with a lot of different cultures.
Nearly 3 out of 4 Lehigh Valley residents, 72%, rate race relations positively, either excellent or good. Younger residents were more likely to give a better grade than older ones, according to this survey. So here to discuss that now is the Racial and Ethnic Justice Community Organizer for Community Action Lehigh Valley, Candace Moody. Candace also leads the agency's Color Outside the Lines initiative. Candace, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much for having me.
So at first glance, 3 out of 4 sounds pretty good, right, on paper, but what's your take of that?
It does sound very optimistic and very good. And I believe, since 2020, after the murder of George Floyd, many of us would hopefully like to see improvements in race relations. That's, the optimism that we're seeing in the survey. However, the results from this survey don't necessarily match what our initiative is receiving from the community or from our partners in the community as well. And even from the videos that you just showed, it's this confusion of what race relations actually means. Many individuals in our community tend to make the comparison of it being diverse to being the same thing as race relations, and essentially those are not the same thing. Diversity does play a key role in our race relations. However, when we're talking about this term, it's essentially defined as how we view people of different racial and ethnic backgrounds that are different from our own, and how we feel about those individuals, how we interact with them on a day-to-day basis as well.
So in your job, what are you hearing from folks?
Yeah, the primary concerns that we're hearing is that the race relations are not necessarily where we would like them to be. You know, there have been improvements over the last about 2 to 5 years, and the diversity that's been offered in, you know, the housing, the education system, some of the recreation things that have been provided in the community, but there's just so much more work that needs to be done as far as cultural awareness and humility when it comes to working with one another in the community.
Candace, you mentioned George Floyd. Did that change anything around here in the Lehigh Valley? Did you see a shift at all?
Yeah, I think it woke people up, you know. I believe that many of us would like to hope that we have reached a point where these conversations don't need to be had, but we've seen a huge shift since 2018 to now 2023, in which more organizations and individuals and agencies are now wanting to bring folks in to have discussions around race and to have more discussions around what it means to be culturally aware and humble.
This might sound like just a simple question, but explain why race relations are so important and for an important part for people to understand.
Yeah, so when we're talking about race relations, especially in a community like the Lehigh Valley, which is so diverse, a healthy community takes care of one another. And in order to have a healthy community, you have to have that cultural awareness. And in order to have that awareness, we have to be able to understand one another. And that also includes, you know, being able to improve the innovation in our area through different mindsets and different cultural backgrounds. It helps increase the economic development here, as well as just on an individual level, being able to learn about someone different from your own background can also increase your own growth.
Sure, in the survey that we conducted, many of the answers were similar, whether it come from someone of color or a white person. Does that surprise you at all?
So I have some critiques with the manner in which the survey was done. Our team, you know, when we went through the survey together, we would really like to see more representation in the pool of people who were considered people of color. So that's one of the critiques that we had for this particular survey. And then also just providing that definition of what race relations actually is, because, you know, even from the videos that you showcased before, most people seem to think of it as, oh, diversity, this melting pot, and even being able to transition from this idea of a melting pot to more of a tossed salad in which we don't have to get rid of our individual identity in order to be a part of the community.
Sure. Chris, I'd like to bring you into this conversation. Is this something you've studied in past surveys?
Yeah, we've looked at it occasionally, and Candace's critique is really fair. You know, the sample of our survey is basically proportional to the demographics of the Lehigh Valley. And so individuals that might identify as Black or Latinx or Asian are a smaller portion as proportional of the Valley. And so both the way we ask the question is very broad, very general, and it's only one item. It's much more nuanced, much more worthy of deeper dives over time. And it would also be wonderful to be able to look more intensely at people of color, different ethnic groups in the Lehigh Valley with a larger sample size. So there are clear limitations to how much we can take from this survey. We have looked at it at points of time, and generally that sense, again, this is one metric where there's a general sense that race relations are good. There was, even in that question though, still a significant subgroup that wasn't necessarily feeling the same thing as the majority of Lehigh Valley residents.
Sure. As I mentioned earlier, the way the Lehigh Valley looks these days is very different than it has in decades past. And so, Candace, I ask you this. This area has changed so dramatically, especially in places like Allentown and Bethlehem, where the Latino population is the majority now. And so I ask you, what does that mean for people in positions like your own?
Yeah, so because I work for a nonprofit that provides a plethora of social services, one of the huge things that we're seeing, not just in our organization, but other organizations in the Lehigh Valley, is the lack in individuals who are bilingual or able to really relate to the cultural background of these individuals who are migrating to the Lehigh Valley. And if you can imagine, if you're trying to give work through somebody who's trying to get a first-time home and they don't understand any of the financial terms in English, and then you're trying to explain those in Spanish, it adds an extra barrier on top of it.
But would you say that's a growing issue across the country, not just here in the Lehigh Valley?
I would say it's definitely a growing issue across the entire United States, but with the Lehigh Valley specifically, if we look at demographically, the Lehigh Valley is expected to reach a demographic of people of color by 2028, as opposed to the rest of the country, which is supposed to reach that demographic by 2040. And majority of that demo is the Latinx community. So when we're seeing the shift, we need to ensure that the jobs that are being provided are, one, accessible for those who are bilingual, and then two, making sure that those who are bilingual are able to actually assist the community at large.
Candace, you're part of a program called Color Outside the Lines, part of Community Action. Tell us what that program is. It launched about a year ago.
Yeah, so it's actually our initiative. It's a 5 to 7 year initiative that was launched just last year. We actually started discussion about this back in 2018 when a group of stakeholders in the community came together to really discuss, the race relations in the Lehigh Valley and where we need to go. So through this initiative, we are essentially looking to tackle racial and ethnic disparities here in the Valley in about 5 key areas of life, which include education, criminal justice, housing, economic opportunity, as well as quality of life. And our quality of life component is actually made up of 4 subcomponents that include mental health, recreation, and arts and culture. And through this initiative, we are looking primarily to tackle these disparities for the BIPOC community, so Black, Indigenous, people of color. And on top of what we do through that, we also, through the Racial and Ethnic Justice Department, provide racial conversations and cultural humility engagement trainings in the community.
And so what does success look like for this program?
So I would say success can be measured in so many different ways. Our initiative is just so huge. So in each industry, there are so many different metrics that we could use to measure our success. But personally, I would just say to have a thriving community that is inclusive and those who are a part of the community actually have ownership within the community, have a sense of feeling safe, and also a sense of feeling like they belong without having to give up any parts of their identity.
Sure. Who are the people that are part of this program? And if people want to get involved, who should get involved, and how do they do so?
Yeah, so I can't list all of our partners because we have over 300 stakeholders in our initiative, but just to list a few of the primary people that are involved, the Chamber of Commerce, PPL, Afros in Nature, Promise Neighborhoods, the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission, even Habitat of Humanity as well. So there's just a few names that are really, really involved and invested in this initiative. But for those who want to get involved, even if you're just an individual who wants to learn how to volunteer or advocate, maybe you're part of a school district and you want to bring us in for anything, they can reach out to us at communityactionlv.org, and you can find our Color Outside the Lines initiative information up there, and we have a contact form on our website as well, and somebody from our team will get in connected.
Wonderful. Some really great information. Candace Moody, thank you so much for joining us. And that will wrap up our community conversation, Life in the Lehigh Valley. I want to thank our guests for their time and insight tonight, and our studio audience for being here in person. And thank you for joining us at home and online. From all of us here at PBS 39 and LehighValleyNews.com, thanks for watching. I'm Brittany Sweeney. Have a good night.